Hi, and welcome to this event by Liverpool Arab Arts Festival and Comma Press, Writing the Palestinian City. My name's Laura Brown and I work with the festival. Writing about any city comes with its complexities. The identity from within and without can make it challenging to tell the story of a place. How do you capture a place in words, capture its essence, its heart and its life? Palestine in particular is a difficult place to write about, even though a lot is written about it. Comma Press regularly gathers together writers to reflect on the notion of place and identity. Their Book of series has taken us from Cairo to Sheffield. Next year, the Book of Ramallah is published. With that in mind, they've invited 3 writers to come together to reflect on their work writing about Palestine. A few housekeeping notes before I hand over to Ra Page from Comma Press, who's going to be chairing this event. Internet connections aren't the same all over the world, so please be patient. We've been doing tech tests with artists to make sure everything runs smoothly, but sometimes the audio works, but the video doesn't. Sometimes the connection drops out altogether. We're going to send you a list of all the titles and the writings at the end of this, so don't worry about making notes and writing everything down. We'll send that to you. Lastly, every event we've programmed as part of Liverpool Arab Arts Festival in 2020 is free. However, we're asking you to make donations. 100% of what you donate will go to artists and commissioning new work for 2021. To make your donation, you can go to arabartsfestival.com/support us.
Okay, so welcome everybody to the Liverpool Arab Arts Festival event today, which is titled Writing the Palestinian City. My name is Ra Page. I'm the founder and editor of Comma Press, which is a short story publisher based in Manchester. Comma Press has had the pleasure of being able to publish a number of different anthologies and commissions from across the Arab world, as I say, specialising in short story. And in particular, we've had the pleasure of commissioning anthologies from Palestine, from Gaza, from across Palestine. And forthcoming next year, we have an anthology of short stories from the city of Ramallah. Because we have a specific theme or focus on writing about the city, we thought we'd put today's event together, bringing together 3 fantastic writers from Palestine. Whenever we say the word Palestine, we mean both the country and the experience, the condition, and the diaspora of Palestinian writers. It's always a complicated kind of phrase when we say Palestinian writers. Today, we're incredibly happy to have 3 kind of leaders in their field. We have Talal Abu Shawish from Gaza. We have Maya Abu Al-Hayat from Jerusalem / Ramallah / nameless, and we have Mazen Maarouf, who is from Lebanon, from Beirut, but is currently based in Iceland. I'm going to introduce them, all 3 of them, and then they're all going to read a short extract from their writing, which relates to this issue of writing about the city. And then we're going to have some questions. I'm going to ask some questions. The readings will be in English. Talal will be answering some of his questions in Arabic. And so we're very lucky to have Mohammed Galaini here to translate or to interpret Talal's questions, Talal's answers. Just to introduce the 3 speakers today, Talal Abu Shawish is Assistant Director of the Boys Preparatory School for Refugees in Gaza. He has published 3 short story collections, The Rest Are Not for Sale, The Assassination of a Painting, and Goodbye Dear Prophet, as well as 4 novels, most recently Urban House. His work has won numerous awards and he's a member of the Palestinian Writers' Union. He was born in Nusayrat refugee camp, apologies for my pronunciation, until they had to flee in 1948. His father lived in the town of Be'er al-Saba, and his mother in the village of Barka. He has contributed stories to 2 Comma books, which I mentioned. One is The Book of Gaza, and one is Palestine Plus 100, which is an anthology of science fiction or future set stories from Palestinian writers. We also are very very lucky to be joined by Maya Al-Hayat, who is a Beirut-born Palestinian novelist and poet living in Jerusalem and working in Ramallah. Today she's going to be reading something about a piece about Nablus, where she went to college and spent much of her teenage years. Maya has published 2 poetry collections, numerous children's stories, 3 novels, including No One Knows His Blood Type. She's the director of the Palestinian Writing Workshop, which is an institution which seeks to encourage reading in Palestinian communities through creative writing projects and storytelling with children and teachers. She's contributed to and wrote a foreword for A Bird Is Not a Stone, which is a great anthology of contemporary Palestinian poetry, and is the editor of the aforementioned forthcoming Book of Ramallah. If you've ever been to the West Bank and have ever been involved in kind of the literary scene, all roads lead to Maya. She's a full of nature, and we're very, very lucky to have her today. And finally, we're joined by Mazen Maarouf, who is a writer, a poet, translator, and a journalist who was born in Beirut to a family of Palestinian refugees who had to flee Talal refugee camp in the beginning of the Lebanese Civil War. Maarouf worked for many years as a chemistry and physics teacher before, and his biography says, drifting into the literary field in 2008. He has published 2 collections of short stories, the groundbreaking Jokes for Gunmen, which was translated into English by Jonathan Wright and long-listed for the International Man Booker, and Rats That Lick the Karate Champion's Ear. He's also published 3 collections of poetry and lives between Iceland and Beirut. He has also, as I say, contributed to Common Palestine Plus 100 anthology. So welcome everybody. Thank you everyone for joining us. As I say, Mazen is joining us from Reykjavik. Talal is joining us from Gaza. Maya is joining us from East Jerusalem. Although, as I say, she normally, her day job is in Ramallah. And if occasionally the line breaks or the connection isn't great, please bear with us. But thank you all for joining us. I thought I'd ask you all to read a short extract, if that's okay. Starting with Talal. Talal, you're going to read a short extract from a story we published in the Book of Gaza called Red Lights. Please put your hands, everybody, together virtually for Talal Abu Shawish.
شكرا كثير. Thank you very much. بس حابب أتكلم بالعربي عن القصة ومحمد يترجم إذا ممكن بكون أفضل.
أوكي.
ممكن يا محمد؟
يعني بدك تقرأ القصة بالعربي ولا بدك تتحدث عن القصة بالعربي عشان أتأكد بس.
بدي أتحدث لك عن القصة بإيجاز.
أوكي، وبعدين حتقرأ بالإنجليزي؟
ضمن الوقت المحدد. لا بدون قراءة. لا بدون قراءة.
Okay.
ضمن الوقت المحدد.
Okay.
3 دقائق.
Talal wants to talk a little bit about the story in Arabic rather than read an excerpt.
That's great.
Okay, تفضل. شوية بس أهم شيء يعني أعطيني فرصة أترجم.
يعني هي تبدو بالبداية كقصة قصيرة. Red Lights تبدو كقصة قصيرة.
The story Red Lights seems at the start as if it's a short story.
ولكن في الحقيقة هي عبارة عن صورة شاملة ومزدحمة بالمشاهد.
But actually it's a more complex picture full of scenes.
بالصدفة ترتبط بعنوان المؤتمر المنوي عقده في ليفربول وهو المدينة، حكاية المدينة.
And coincidentally it's linked to the title of the event we're having in Liverpool, the event about writing the Palestinian city.
وهي مصادفة إني كتبت القصة في السابق ومطلوب الحديث عن المدينة في الأدب.
And that's actually a coincidence that I wrote the story, but that's a story that's talking about a city.
قد تبدو الصورة سوداوية جدا عن المدينة.
it may seem like a pessimistic view of the city,
ولكن هذا هو حال مدينة غزة.
but that's how the situation in Gaza is.
غزة المدينة الإنسان
Gaza and its people,
الإنسان لم تأخذ فرصتها في الحياة الطبيعية مثل باقي المدن.
Gaza and its people haven't had a chance to live like the other cities of the world.
فهي عبر مئات وعشرات السنين انتقلت من احتلال إلى احتلال.
Through tens and even hundreds of years, Gaza has moved from one occupier to the next.
من الاحتلال التركي إلى الاحتلال الإنجليزي إلى الحملة الفرنسية إلى الإدارة المصرية إلى الاحتلال الإسرائيلي أخيرا.
From Turkish occupation to the British mandate to the French campaign to the I think it was the Egyptian administration, and then currently to the Israeli occupation.
ولهذا ظل المكان دائما في الأدب الفلسطيني شكل معضلة.
And for that, the issue of place in Palestinian literature continues to pose a problem.
وكما يقال إنه الفلسطيني بسبب أزمة المكان.
It's said that the Palestinian, because of the crisis or dilemma over place,
وتنقل الدائم في دول الشتات
and
أماكن الشتات,
and our constant movement between in throughout the diaspora,
لا يستطيع حتى أن ينشئ حديقة صغيرة أو مكتبة صغيرة في منزل.
So the Palestinian can't even tend to a small garden or a small library in their home.
لأنه دائم التنقل.
Because Palestinians are in constant movement.
قصة ريد لايتس أو الصورة ريد لايتس.
The story or the picture that the short story Red Lights portrays
عبرت فيها الكاميرا أو مرت فيها الكاميرا.
The camera the camera moves through it as if
في أهم رموز هذه المدينة.
The camera moves through the story of it's passing through the important symbols of the city.
وفي كل مكان في القصة.
In every point in the story.
كان هناك الطفل المتسول.
We see the young begging child.
وعلى كل مفترق من مفارقها المهمة والشهيرة كان هناك متسول.
At every junction of the important junctions of Gaza, there's a child begging in the story.
وبالمقابل كان هناك الإنسان المتضامن.
And then juxtaposed with this, there's a person showing solidarity.
برغم كل الظروف القاهرة إلا أنه الفلسطيني يعكس حالة من التضامن والتعاطف مع كل القضايا الإنسانية.
Despite all the difficult circumstances that Palestinians go through, they show solidarity and compassion with the human condition.
وكأنه يريد أن يوصل رسالة إلى أنه الفلسطيني يستطيع أن يكون عنصر فاعل في الأسرة الكونية.
It's as if they want to convey a message that Palestinians can be active participants in the universal story.
وأرمز لهذه الرسالة بأنه مهما كانت الإشارات دائما حمراء فإن هناك دائما أمل.
The symbology I use in the story is that no matter how many red lights you stop at, how many red traffic lights you stop at, there's always hope.
Yes, شكرا محمد. شكرا.
Thank you, Talal. He reaches behind him over the seat so the passengers next to me in the back of the car can put their fares into his outstretched hand. He carelessly chucks the money down beside him with a gesture of disgust that I resent. In an attempt to get him talking, I mutter, "It's a tough situation, but it's temporary." "There are more passengers than cars," he retorts. "What we take only just covers our fuel costs." He falls silent and contemplates me in his rearview mirror for a moment before continuing bitterly. "A taxi driver is exactly like a beggar. The only difference between them is that a beggar puts his hand out in front of him and a driver puts his hand out behind him." He stops at a red light near Firas Shabi Market. He sighs heavily, almost violently, with an air of utter exasperation, and begins drumming irritably on the steering wheel with his fingers. A beautiful face approaches. It belongs to a boy who can't be more than 9 years old. He's saying something, but so quietly that we can't make out the words through the glass. The driver presses a button to lower the window, and the child's voice fills the car as his hand reaches in, holding out 2 bars of chocolate. "Just a shekel, 2 for a shekel." The driver gives him a shekel and takes only one of the bars. He offers it to us, and we all turn it down, so he throws it onto his dashboard, and seeing the lights turn green, clunks the car into gear ready to pull away. He fiddles with the tape player to get it working, and Kulthum's voice suddenly soars out. "Not the right time for you," he mutters to himself and ejects the tape. Turning on the radio, the announcer's quavering voice brings an air of war, raging war, right into the car. Siege, assassination, injury, detention. The driver speeds up, racing to catch the green lights he can see up ahead of us. But before the car reaches them, they've changed through yellow to red, and he's forced to stop again. He turns off the radio with an irritable snap and goes back to tapping his sense of rhythm on the steering wheel. Another beautiful face draws near. This child is about 12 years old. The driver lets out another infuriated snort and then lowers the window. Once again, the sound of a child's voice fills the car. "Half the price it is in the shops." As the little hand thrusts a packet of chewing gum towards us through the window, the driver looks at the passengers' faces in the rearview mirror. None of us move a muscle. He picks up a coin and hands it to the kid, takes the packet of gum and lobs it onto the dashboard next to the bar of chocolate. The light turns green. I suddenly realize I didn't give him my fare when the others did, but I'm reluctant to hand it to him directly. I don't want to see him put his hand out behind him, so I give my money to the passenger sitting next to him in the front, who passes it on. The driver looks at me in the rearview mirror and smiles. We're passing the Unknown Soldier Park now, where some mellow faces loll on the green grass, and others exchange nargila smoke up into the sky above the cafe chairs. 2 young men trail along behind a gaggle of careless, coquettish young women who are wandering around the place in circles. All of them are looking for an escape. The car turns left towards Rashad al-Shawwa Junction. The lights are red, as usual. He pulls up, puts on the handbrake, and reaches for a packet of cigarettes. He opens them and offers them around in case any of us wants to smoke. Once we've all said no, thanking him, he takes out a cigarette and lights it. A young lad comes over to the car, carrying a wet rag. He could just be over 15. He wipes the bonnet quickly, then comes around to wipe the wing mirror on the driver's side. The driver takes a long, deep breath, looking intently at the lad's face. Then he orders him to stop cleaning the car. Little boy backs away from the car as the beseeching look in his eyes turns to resignation. The driver beckons him back over and hands out a coin. The boy snatches it in happy disbelief. It's been a long time coming, this sudden payment. He moves off a little way, heading for another car, but our driver calls out to him once again. So he hesitantly comes back over. The driver hands him the chocolate bar and the chewing gum. Sell these and keep the money. The lights turn green and the car pulls away. It turns left and races off towards Al-Azhar University Junction, where more red lights await us.
Thank you, Mohammed.
شكرا محمد.
Shukran, Mohammed. And thank you, Talal. I guess now this is a good moment to ask Maya to read her extract.
Hi, everybody. My story called, it's not a story, it's an autobiography. My vertical city and my horizontal escape. I have never been that romantic about the place. When I was growing up, Nablus was about my aunts and uncles and their kids who would visit us from the city. We would meet at my aunt's house in Amman, the one we used to call the hotel. They would bring tales of the bridge and the metal containers filled with cheese and olives and zalabia. My aunt's tiny house would suddenly become even smaller and crowded. When I was a bit older, I went to live with my father in Tunis. Nablus then became his holy place, according to him, obsessed with the dishes and delicacies of the city. We would go from one Lebanese restaurant to next, so he could find somewhere to eat knafe, ajje, or zalabia. All of these were now associated in my head with that legendary place that made weird and wonderful desserts we couldn't find anywhere else. As the news of Oslo Accords and talk of possible return reached fever pitch, I started to hear from my father of his hopes and dreams and wishes to return to one of the ruins house in Nablus. He preferred that over living in any of the world's finest cities. As for me, I had no choice in loving that city or hating it yet. They had taken me away from the thing that I loved, from my bedroom in Tunis with my books and posters on the walls, so we could return to Palestine. Return to Palestine, that phrase that was somewhat strange to me. Return means that you were there once and are returning, but I had never been there. So my father was returning and I would return with him. Till then, any concept of Nablus in my head was from news reports of the First Intifada, of children being murdered and soldiers breaking the bones of young folk. My Nablus was all about myths and stories of the old city, mystical beings and ghosts. The Yasmin neighborhood and Onion Market, I imagined a city with no streets or even apartment blocks. I may have even imagined a city of tents and dirt trucks. It was hot when we came to Jericho from the first time after the Oslo on the 7th July 1995. My sister and I were at the state of disgruntlement. I will repeat this. My sister and I were in a state of disgruntlement about all the decisions that were being made on our behalf. I remember being amazed at the paved road that went from the bridge via Jericho and on to Nablus, thinking that it would never end. We passed by Al-Badan Valley and stopped to drink from its cold spring. I dozed off in the car, and when I opened my eyes, I was so taken with the greenery and the trees I had never seen before. We traveled through Balata refugee camp and Al-Askar refugee camp at the entrance of the city, and all I could see were paved roads, tall buildings, and so many cars. Al-Aishiyya school, where I finished my secondary education, is on Amman Street, in one of the less well-held parts of the city, close to where my uncles lived, having moved there from the old city, my father's birthplace, to Al-Dahya neighborhood, close to a military checkpoint on the heights of Jerzim Hill. University life took me to Western Nablus. In my mind eyes, Nablus now had much warmer associations with other ideas and more romantic notions. My teenage antiques around the city roundabout and city street where my sweetheart lived. Nablus was now short-haired with a broad forehead and thick-set shoulders and a green sky. This was towards the end of 1998, back in the days when the summer never seemed to end. But it ended forever in one fell swoop with the start of the Second Intifada. On its first day, there at the city entrance on Amman streets, where I first came to Nablus, my sweetheart was murdered by bullet to his head while on a student protest. And so the city died to me forever. Nablus, the city built on the two hills of Ribal and Jerzim, the city of stone that was a trading hub that meant it was the commercial capital of Palestine, the city that still has the mystique that all the historic city hold. Myth and legends, feudal families, and those that are poor and destitute. Many made folk and poems and poets. Houses waiting for the scents of jasmine, lemon, and roses, and also maqloube and knafe, and traditional Palestinian soup. Traditions and customs that pressure you, but also bring pleasure at the same time. My father would sit outside his house in the old city for many years. He drank countless cups of tea and reminds about his thick hair and his tailored suits in the style that Abdul Halim Hafiz wore when he watched his films at the only city in the city on Fridays. My father returned to Nablus as if he had never left it. He didn't change and didn't become someone else. He was never fully content or overly happy, but he was in his place. He put his suitcase in the keyboard and did not want to see it abroad. I did not want to see it again. For me, after university, Nablus became a vertical city. It forced me to think of the heavens rather than the solid ground. It didn't allow me to have clear horizontal vision. When my father passed away, I had to escape the city where he lay buried in the eastern cemetery and my sweetheart lay in the western one. I had to escape to more horizontal cities nearby so I could breathe. Thank you.
Thank you, Maya. I'm now going to pass over to Mazen, who's going to read an extract from Jokes for the Government. Mazen, over to you.
Yes, hello everybody. I'm going to read part of the second chapter of the title story in Jokes for the Gunman, and it's translated into English by Jonathan Wright. Grasshopper. At school, the kids competed with each other by telling stories about how their fathers beat them. These stories illustrated the power each father had in his household. Power was the most important subject as far as we were concerned during the war. My father wasn't at the top of the hierarchy of fathers, of course, because he hadn't invented the cruelest punishment. But I told the other kids boastfully that he had whipped me with a leather belt. When I was asked why I lied, I didn't say it was because I had spat on the pepper plant. Instead, I made up a story that showed me doing something really daring, that showed I was made of heroic stuff. I swallowed my mother's bottle of Valium pills, I said. And my father whipped me till I threw up all the pills in one go. Some days after I told my heroic story, a friend of mine came up to me and told me he had seen my father being beaten up in the street. He was wearing a brown belt, he said, but he didn't use it. Isn't it that belt that he whipped you with? Yes, I replied with a nod, because my father only had one brown belt. My friend who saw the whole scene described it to me as if it were happening in a peep show he was watching. When my father came home, I noticed that the marks on his face were not scalds from the steam in the laundry. In order to find out how painful they were, I prodded the largest mark on his face with my finger. He was asleep, but he started from the pain and turned his face away without opening his eyes, pretending he was still asleep. It was then that I realized that my father's soul had left the pepper plant forever. I blamed myself, because if I hadn't broken off the largest pepper and trodden it underfoot, my father wouldn't have become so weak or so cowardly either. That's what hurt me most. My father didn't beat me after that, despite my repeated attempts to provoke him. I spat on the pepper plant several times in front of him, but he didn't react at all, no matter how big the glob of spit was or how noisily I did it. My father stopped speaking to me so often. He started spending most of his time in the bathroom, sitting on the edge of the bathtub. I would snoop on him through the keyhole, and he looked absent-minded. He even started drooling at the mouth without realizing it. From behind the door, like a friend offering him advice as they fished, sitting side by side by the sea, I whispered through gritted teeth, "Don't cry, don't cry." And my father never did cry, which convinced me that he hadn't completely lost his grip. A short while later, after he got back from work with footprints on his clothes, he picked up the television and put it under the tree in front of our building. There was nothing wrong with the television. My father just wanted everyone to see that he wasn't watching anything political. My father never stopped going to work because his laundry was responsible for washing and ironing clothes for the guests at a large hotel, most of them foreign journalists. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mazen. I think when talking about writing the Palestinian city, we're just as much talking about writing about the city within a Palestinian writing, because as I said at the beginning, and for so many writers, including yourself, Mazen, the experience of living in the city is often not the experience of living in a Palestinian city, no matter how Palestinian you are. As all of the stories have shown, cities represent many different things for different writers. For the person returning to a city in which they lived in, like Maya's father, it's one thing. For the daughter who's never lived in that city, it's not returning, it's being returned, it's being forcefully almost delivered into a completely new and to a certain extent strange place. And for you, Mazen, you've never lived in Palestine, as far as I know, but you very deliberately choose not to name the cities in which many of your stories are based. Mazen, why is it that you choose to not name the cities, and they're kind of they're a generic city?
I think I first share what Talal said about, the relation between Palestinian and the city. Now, I was born in Lebanon as Palestinian refugee. So I was born with a statement that I'm not allowed to consider Beirut as my city. And consequently, Palestine was my fictional country. It was my country. It was so fictional. At that time, there was no social media. There was no access to photos or any information in the digital or any archive. Beirut is highly political city. And we didn't have any really material that would support our visual, fantasy about Palestine. So my country was I was living at some point, identity-wise, in a fictional country that I've never visited, while I was practicing my daily life memories through a city that reminds me every day, and still, of course, till now, Beirut is one of the most brutal cities to live in as a refugee, because everything works there to remind you daily that this is not your place. And I think this is the lack of acknowledging, or the right to acknowledge Beirut as my city, because I cannot, for example, say I'm Palestinian 100%. My personal memories are Lebanese. I grew up there, and I have to admit that Beirut is big part of my memory. While Palestine, at the same time, still I can't really make sense of it in a way that I can't really. I think I need to go there and stay there for some time to be able to understand this place and understand my relation to it. But for example, here in Reykjavik, still, I also don't feel that, I don't feel that this is my city here in Iceland. So I think I still, I would never be able to write about a city from a way that would, in a non-fictional way or whatsoever. So that's why I think I camouflaged the city in a way that it's so general and so personal and nameless.
Thank you. Do you feel the same, Mayor, that you're living through different kind of fictions or fictional versions of these cities? I mean, your experience is very different. You've grown up outside of Palestine, and then you've been returned to it, and then you kind of spend much of your life trying to navigate between East Jerusalem, kind of part of Israel, and Ramallah, moving in and out of different cities. Do you feel that you've grown through fictions and found the real cities, or do you think you're still living amongst kind of fictional versions of these cities?
I think I also feel like I'm an outsider, even when I lived in Nablus or in Ramallah or even now in Jerusalem. It's always like I'm not from the city. I'm outsider that watch everything and live their life, not my life. And I'm always still searching for something which is never. I don't know if I will find it or not, but it's never there. And I was thinking about that a lot, because I think when you move a lot when you are young and leave your friends, leave your schools, leave your bedrooms, and even the one for the whole of your lives, that you will always be searching. You will still searching until you die. You will never find the things that say that this is the end, because you grow up like this. It's something that built in your system. So when I was living in Nablus, I think I lived it too much. It was very heavy city. It was, for me, it was like I was returning from Tunis, a totally different city, open-minded, and came to Nablus, which is very hard and harsh city, lived in between two mountains, and you lived it until the end, especially that I had my experience in university, having a lot of philosophical and religious experience there. But then you were always try to escape. Ramallah, you are not living in the city of Ramallah. You are escaping to Ramallah, because Ramallah is really a horizontal city. It's not a city and not a village, and at the same time everything is happening there. So it's light. It can give you a space to experiment, do some experimental, be yourself, or find yourself. Try to find yourself, but at the same time, it's not your city, or it's not anybody's city. It's everybody's city, which is good. That's why maybe when I now live in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is totally different. It's very conflict. Everybody is trying to say that this is our city. So you feel it's tense and tension everywhere. So in Jerusalem, I feel like I'm outsider, I'm watched all the time. I had to prove my identity all the time. I had to say that I have a permit to live in Jerusalem. It's not like I can, maybe after 1 year they will say they will not renew my permit and I will not be able to live here. So it's like I'm always living at the edge in Jerusalem. Maybe that's why I'm always saving to live also at Ramallah. So when I'm saying now I live in Jerusalem, I always say I live at the checkpoints. I'm not living in the city of Jerusalem. I live at Qalandia checkpoints. So it's always like you are living at the edge, at the checkpoints, at the at the road. You are not reaching, you are not living, but you are living at the road. Yeah.
Thank you. Atef, do you feel the same, or do you feel that living in Gaza, you're very much kind of in a prison which nobody else can experience except for Gazans? Mohammed, do you want to translate? Is Atef still right?
طلال بسألك را أنت هنا؟ طلال أنت على ميوت فلازم تشيل الميوت عشان نسمعك.
طلال
سامعني؟ اوكي
سامعينك. بدك اترجم لك السؤال؟
يا ريت.
اوكي. بيسألك را انت بتحس بنفس الاحساس اللي وصفوه مايا ومازن انه يعني كونك كيفية اتصالك بالمدينة؟
يعني غزة يمكن مدينة فريدة من نوعها، تختلف عن رام الله، تختلف عن القدس، تختلف عن كل مدن فلسطين.
So Gaza is a unique city, different from all the other cities in Palestine, different to Ramallah, to Jerusalem or anywhere else.
بالنسبة لي كطلال يعني هي مرتبطة بذاكرتين، ذاكرة طفولة وذاكرة شباب.
For me, Gaza is linked to two types of memories of my childhood and memories of my youth.
يعني مثلا عندما كنت صغير وعندما كنت طفل كانت المدينة وزيارة المدينة بالنسبة لي تمثل حلم وأنا ابن مخيم. يعني الذهاب إلى السينما مثلا كان حدث كبير بالنسبة لي.
When I was a young child, visiting Gaza was like a dream, especially as someone that grew up in a refugee camp. So, for example, going to the cinema was a major event.
يعني كنا في المخيم نطمح لرؤية الاختلاف، ولكن في المخيم كل شيء متشابه، البيت والشارع والناس والزقاق.
Living in a refugee camp where everything was the same, every house was similar to the next one, every alley was similar to the next one. It was really important to us to see something outside that was different.
يعني لم أعرف المدن إلا حينما خرجنا في رحلة مدرسية.
My first experience of cities was going on a school trip outside the camp to Gaza.
في البداية في ذاكرة الطفولة كنا نرى المباني والعمارات والمؤسسات والمباني الكبيرة، فتثير استغرابنا وتثير دهشتنا. ولكن بعد ذلك في مرحلة الشباب وبعد ما تشكلت الذاكرة الثانية بدأنا نرى المدينة على حقيقتها.
In my childhood memories of the city, I'd see the tall buildings and institutions, and it would be impressive. But then, as a young person, a young adult, I started seeing the city for what it really was.
ففي زوايا المدينة رأينا الحواري ورأينا الفقر ورأينا أشياء تشبه ما يجري في المخيمات، مخيمات اللاجئين.
So in the different corners of the cities, the hidden places, I started seeing the alleyways and the poverty, and seeing experiences that were similar to what I knew of the refugee camps of my childhood.
لذلك في تجربتي الشخصية عندما بديت أكتب عن المدينة، يعني صرت ألاقي مادة الكتابة في المدينة تشبه أيضا المادة اللي موجودة في المخيم.
So from my personal experience, when I started writing about the city, I would find material in Gaza, for example, that was very similar to what I'd find in the refugee camp.
Yeah.
Okay.
There seems to be some interesting kind of connections between the two the passages that you all read. For instance, Mazen, you talk about this unnamed city and the way that the way he negotiates with the city is by trying to negotiate with power. He tries to elevate the status of his father into somebody who's a tough guy rather than somebody who's beaten up, somebody who's worthy of being kidnapped, somebody who beats his children. And that negotiation the child works out is a negotiation with the strong men, with the gunmen at the end of the street, and with the kind of rough, the hoodlums and the kind of hired thugs, the people he called the hippopotamuses in that story. It's not about the architecture. And in a similar way, Maya, in your story, Nablus is, as you say, it's a very heavy city. It's very oppressive. The kind of it's maybe repressive in terms of it being a very traditional religious city, but also as the one city that I've been to that we're talking about, one of the things you notice about Nablus, as well as it being this very steep kind of valley at the bottom of between two mountains, and the wonderful architecture and all the history, one of the things you really notice are these posters everywhere of martyrs, of young men who've been martyred recently, and you see the same posters reproduced in shop windows and on like billboards or pasted on walls everywhere. And it kind of makes you think a little bit like the boy in Mazen's story. You know, if I, as a boy or as a teenage young male growing up in a city with that kind of iconography of strength, you'd think, well, yeah, I would behave like Mazen's character. I would want to negotiate my way into that kind of world of power, or position myself, you know, prove myself within that world. So I guess my question to you, Maya, is where does that leave kind of the women? Where does that leave the girls or the young women growing up surrounded by that kind of iconography of strength?
Yani you have always to prove yourself, I think. Yani to prove your like pure self. That's why maybe you changed a lot as a woman, actually, in when living in cities like Nablus, for example. You have too many ups and downs and changes. But for men, it's like it's a city that's built for you. So that's why when I was young and living in, like, had my university in Nablus, I was like, I put the veil for 2 years, for example, because I was like, I wanted people to know that I'm good. Yeah, please believe me, I am very good. And maybe that's how they will believe me, by putting the symbols of religious, for example, or because I was different. I was different because I was returning from the outside, and at the same time I was different because I write poetry and have different way of thinking and expressing myself. So at some point, I wanted to be like them, like to be like everybody else, and to prove myself. And then, when you grow up, maybe, or become more understanding to what is happening around you, you accept yourself as it is, and that's what happened to me. But that's happened because I escaped from the city. It's like escape from vertical city to a horizontal city, as I said before. So, I think until now, even in Ramallah, you as a woman, you can't find your place. I think everybody is built for men, not for women. Even when you are in a city like Ramallah, and you have everything but at the same time, you still have to prove yourself all the time. Yeah.
Okay, well, I guess my last question to all three of you really is: what are the greatest challenges of writing about a city when you know that most of your Arab readership won't be able to visit that city, and certainly most of your readership elsewhere in the world won't be able to? Anyone that knows anything about Palestine knows that you can't. Very few people can go there. If you're from Gaza, you can't go to the West Bank. If you're from the West Bank, you can't go to Gaza. And even within the West Bank, you can't really move around that much very, very easily, or it's incredibly stressful to do so. And you've also got probably relatives around the world who can't visit you very easily. What are the greatest challenges of writing about a place that is not accessible to your readers? Is it a problem, or do you feel you have to compensate for that lack of access? I'll start with you, Maya.
Well, me? Actually, I would love to talk about for the last collections, Ramallah, the stories from Ramallah. Most of the stories are happening on the roads. Yeah, So I was all the time searching for stories that happened at houses. Yeah. Because your house is your city, and it's rare for Palestinian writers to think about the house as it is. It's always like your city is the house, because it takes a lot of your energy and your identity and what can you do and what you can't do, the city itself. So too many stories were happening at houses, at the real Ramallah, the real streets of Ramallah, not at the road to Ramallah, for example. And because it's heavy, it's readers, when readers have brief thoughts about these cities, already want to read something specific about the city, and you want as a writer to take them to a new journey to Ramallah. I wanted to see the real Ramallah, the real isolation, the real fear, the real lives. That was, I think, one of the most challenging experience for me.
Thank you. Talal, how was it for you as a writer from Gaza, trying to write about your city for people who aren't able to ever go there?
محمد
طلال، بسألك كيف خبرتك أنت كشخص ساكن في غزة، ككاتب ساكن في غزة، تكتب عن المدينة لأشخاص ولا عمرهم راح يقدروا يوصلوا لها للمدينة هاي؟
هو الغريب انه خليني احكي عن الحال الخاص اللي موجود في غزة، انه في هناك تشابه كبير اصبح بين المخيم والمدينة. المدينة تراجعت يا محمد في البنية الثقافية، في الجانب الحريات إلى آخره، أصبحت تشبه بكثير المخيم.
I guess I want to speak about the specific situation of writing about Gaza and how life in Gaza recently and life in Gaza City, it's become not that easy to differentiate between life in the city and life in the refugee camp.
ولا مش راغب إنه أنا يعني أغرق تفاصيل السياسة، ولكن بكل صراحة أقول بأنه هناك هزيمة لحقت بكل أصحاب الفكر السياسي العلماني والليبرالي واليساري لصالح الثقافة الرجعية والمتخلفة. فغزة الآن والمخيمات كلها تعيش حالة انفصام.
I don't want to
انفصام حقيقي.
I don't want to get into too much detail of politics, but it's sad to say that Gaza has regressed, and progressive and secular thought in Gaza has taken a back seat to more regressive religious ideologies, and that creates quite a dichotomy in Gaza.
من خلال عملي في مدرسة في مدينة غزة، في المدينة نفسها يعني.
Through my work in a school in the city of Gaza.
حوالي 12 سنة في مدرسة إعدادي في المدينة.
I've been working for 12 years in a preparatory school in Gaza for a secondary school in Gaza.
و13 سنة في مدارس المخيمات.
And then 13 years before that in schools in refugee camps.
في البيئة المدرسية في المخيم والمدينة استطعت أن أرى قصص حواري المدينة وقصص أزقة المخيم.
In the school environment in both places, I was able to see the stories from both the alleyways of the city and the alleys of the refugee camp.
وإذا كان البيت هو مدينة الأخت مايا.
If the house is the city that Maya describes.
فالمدرسة هي مدينة أكثر خصوصية.
So to me, the school is an even more specific type of city.
والكاتب بيستطيع إنه يعني يقتنص ويشوف قصص وحكايا أكثر كمان من البيت بكثير، لأنه في المدرسة هناك آلاف البيوت.
And as a writer with the privilege of access to a school, I feel I can see so many more stories because a school has thousands of houses and households that are represented there.
في ال10 سنوات الأخيرة لدي حوالي 400 قصة قصيرة من المدرسة.
In the last 10 years, I've gathered material for 400 short stories from the school.
هي مكتوبة كمسودات، وإن شاء الله هتكون يعني مشروعي القادم إن شاء الله أختار منها للنشر.
I've written these as drafts, and I hope to use these to make these my next project for publication.
شكرا محمد.
شكرا.
Mazen, sort of the same question to you, but to put it a slightly different way, do you feel that you have a specific audience that you're writing to? Do you have an audience in mind? As you say, your experience is very dislocated and it's very sort of one foot in one world and one foot in another. Do you have a sense of your audience being in one particular world?
I don't get you. I don't understand your question. What do you mean specific audience?
Do you have a reader in mind? Do you have is the reader Arab? Is the reader Palestinian? Are you writing for Palestinian refugees in York or descendants of refugees, Palestinian diaspora, or are you writing for readers all over the world who don't really maybe know the intricacies of your experience?
Well, I have to, I write from my personal experience, and I have to be in the first place, honest in how I refer to my personal experience and my personal story. So the city comes as a byproduct in the process of writing. And I think all these, like, otherwise we would easily fall into the kitsch of the city in the writing, because this is a very, very classical theme, very old theme. It's been always, you know, like, and I think in 2020 we have to look at different ways of reach the city as well, because I think now cities like and urbanism is so different from, like, we are living at times where pandemics put us in this way of communication through Zoom. So like the amount of dystopia, fictional part in our reality has been big. For me as a refugee, for example, I said that I haven't seen Palestine. I mean, when I was a kid, I couldn't see pictures of Palestine or anything. Palestine is still fictional, but still I can see lots of photos and you know, like visual material through the internet, which also proposes a reality that would clash with my fictional Palestine. So the fictional place is not entirely fictional and it's not entirely real, because I haven't experienced it myself. But I think I represent also like a category of Palestinians who had never been into, you know, like, for example, my parents had never been in Palestine, like they lived all their lives as refugees. And there is thousands and thousands of Palestinian refugees. And this is one part of the bitter truth, that only some part of Palestinians or some group could return to Palestine after Oslo. So there is like plenty of, like, you know, this is so multi-layered. It's not only about, you know, Palestinians in diaspora or inside, or I think we all, like, if we, like, I think Palestinians, what probably enriches, you know, all these Palestinians around the world, that they have been interacting for decades with their local culture, the culture of exile. So that I think if we meet, like, if all Palestinians could go back home to their homes in Palestine, it would be very, very rich culturally, because, you know, like, we bred culturally in a different way. And I think, you know, Beirut as a city, like, it represents like a place that tried to frame my Palestinian identity, rather than a place of, like, streets or, you know, like a social system or like. So I think that's why, for example, I read this excerpt of my story, not because I'm representing an example of, like, how the city is, or how the situation in the city of Beirut is, but it's just like, this is my personal and my search of some sort of existence through fiction, and to speak to myself, to speak to this imaginary place, and like what damage it had left in me, and if I am really, like, you know, like, if I'm really able to go back one day, like.
Thank you. We've run out of time, sadly. We could keep talking about this all day. I know I certainly could, but sadly we've run out of time. As I say, there's examples of all three of the writers' works online and in the books that Comma publish. We'll be posting links to examples of the works, two of the works that were read today online, so people can read more. But for now, please join me in thanking our three fantastic readers today, Mazen Maarouf, Maya Abu Al-Hayat, and Talal Abu Shawish. And thank you, shukran, also to Mohammed Galini for translating and interpreting today. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.